The stars here were wrong. Jay sat in the observation blister of the alien vessel, the luminous inquiry, and tried not to let his discomfort show. The constellations were twisted, unfamiliar splatters of light against the velvet black. Back on the Guangzhou, the old star charts, passed down for 7 generations, had pointed the way home to a star none of them had ever seen. Now even those ghostly guides were gone. The door to the blister slid open with a soft hiss. Kalen entered, his tall, willowy frame moving with a grace that still seemed unnatural to Jay. His skin had a subtle, bark-like texture and shifted through hues of soft blue and gray, depending on his mood. He was a historian of the Galactic Concordance, and currently, Jay was his most fascinating subject. "You are contemplating the celestial variance again, friend Jay," Kalen said. His voice a gentle ripple of sound from the translator pendant on his chest. "Just looking," Jay replied, his voice rough from disuse. He was a man in his 40s, his face lined more from the strain of constant survival than from years. His hands, resting on his knees, were scarred from a lifetime of repairing ancient machinery in the recycled air of the generation ship. "The council session begins soon," Collins said, settling onto a floating disc that served as a seat. "They are eager to hear more. Your arrival has caused quite a stir. A living fragment of the cradle world myth." Jay felt a familiar, cold knot form in his stomach. Fairy tales. That's all Earth was to them. A story told to younglings about a place of impossible wonders and equally impossible terrors, sealed away by the ancients for the safety of the galaxy. "It's not a myth," Jay said, the words coming out harder than he intended. "Of course." "Of course," Kalang soothed, his skin flushing a placating green. "Forgive my terminology. But you must understand, your people vanished from galactic records millennia ago. Only echoes remain. Tales of warriors who fought with the fury of supernovas, of plagues that could think, of machines that dreamed. Most consider it allegory. A cautionary tale about unchecked ambition. The Guangzhou had been a desperate gamble. A final failing arc launched at the tail end of Earth's last great war, carrying a splinter of humanity meant to preserve their culture. They had drifted, lost, for centuries, systems failing one by one. When their last engine sputtered and died, they sent out a general distress beacon on a frequency so old it was practically archaeology. The luminous inquiry had found them, a silent, pitted hulk adrift in the dark. Its last 1,000 inhabitants clinging to life in the frozen core got now. Jay and a handful of others were here on Harmony's Reach, the gleaming multicultural station that served as a concordance hub. The rest were on a medical barge, recovering from decades of malnutrition and low-grade radiation poisoning. "They want the story," Jay, Kalan continued. "The pleasant story. The story of the lost children coming home. It fits a popular narrative." Jay's granddaughter, Hannah, entered the blister. At 24, she had the same dark, watchful eyes as Jay, but where his gaze was weary, hers was sharp, analytical. She had been the Guangzhou's junior engineering officer, a genius at making broken things work for one more day. She wore simple station-issue clothes, gray and formless, but carried herself with a tension that the soft fabrics couldn't disguise. "The council is ready for us." "Harabayaji," she said, using the Korean word for grandfather. She didn't look at Kalan. She didn't trust the smooth, colorful aliens who spoke in gentle tones and looked at them like exhibits in a zoo. The Concordance Council chamber was a vast, circular room with a transparent dome overlooking the glittering band of the galaxy. Representatives of a dozen species sat in floating tiers. In the center was Admiral Tavek, a Vivilian. His species was amphibious, with sleek, silver-gray skin and large, black eyes that held no warmth. He was the head of the Concordance defense fleet, and his impatience was a palpable force in the room. Jay, and Hana stood on a central platform. Kalen hovered nearby, ready to provide context. Navigator J. Tvek began, his translated voice crisp and devoid of inflection. Your vessel's origin has been confirmed. Your genetic lineage matches biosamples in our oldest archives. You are indeed from the world we call Terra, or, as the stories say, Earth. A soft murmur went through the chamber. Some of the delegates leaned forward, their various features alight with curiosity. We welcome you to the Concordance, Tvek continued, not sounding welcoming at all. Asylum and aid have been granted. Now, satisfy our academic interest. Tell us of Earth. Is it the garden world of legend? The source of the great myths? Jay took a slow breath. He could give them the fairy tale. He could speak of blue skies and green lands, of oceans and mountains from the ancient stories. It would be easier. He met Hana's eyes. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head. No. Earth was a survivor, Jay said, his voice carrying through the silent chamber. We were not sealed away by gods. We hid from ourselves. Our history. It is not one long golden age. It is a cycle. We would build wonders. Then we would use them to tear everything down. The last war. It wasn't against monsters or aliens. It was against each other. The Gwangju was launched not as an exploration vessel, but as a desperate lifeboat. The council members shifted. This was not the pleasant story. And these tailies? Pressed a delicate, moth-like delegate from the Lumin race. The stories of great warriors? Of terrifying weapons? We had to be strong to survive what we did to our own world, Jay said carefully. And yes, we made weapons. But the greatest lesson we carried was that any weapon powerful enough to ensure victory could also ensure there was nothing left to win. Admiral Tvek waved a webbed hand dismissively. Primitive planet-bound conflicts. Understandable. But you speak of hiding. From what? From becoming what we feared, Jay said, the words feeling inadequate. The decision was made to step back, to try and grow up. Before we reached the stars, Tvek's large black eyes seemed to darken further. A quaint philosophy. But you are here now, and you have no fleet, no advanced technology. Your ship is a museum piece. You are a people without a home, living on stories of past glory. The condescension was like a physical blow. Hana's hands clenched at her sides. We have our history, Hana said, her voice clear and cutting through the room's murmur. And our memories. They are not all pleasant, but they are real. Tvek focused on her, a new curiosity in his gaze. Memories of what, precisely? Jay answered before Hana could. Of consequences, Admiral. Every action has one. That is the only magic we brought with us. The session ended shortly after. They were dismissed with polite, distant smiles. As they were led out, Jay heard snippets of conversation. Charming anachronisms. The psychological impact of generational trauma. Perfect candidates for the Cultural Preservation Wing turn their history into an interactive experience for the young. They were not seen as survivors or even as refugees. They were curiosities, living artifacts of a bedtime story. Later, in their assigned quarters, a comfortable, sterile suite with a stunning, false view of a nebula, Hana finally erupted. They don't understand. They're looking at a warning label and thinking it's the instructions for a toy. They have never known true fear, Hana, Jay said, staring at the beautiful, simulated gases on the wall. Their unity was given, not earned through blood and fire. They see our caution as weakness, our history as entertainment. We have to make them understand, she insisted. How? Jay asked, turning to her. His weariness was a heavy cloak. We have no proof. Only stories they already think are fiction. Hana walked to a terminal provided by their hosts. With a few quick commands, she bypassed the simple entertainment interface and accessed her personal data core, a battered slab of composite from the Guangzhou that contained the ship's fragmented archives. We have more than stories. Harabeoji, she said, her fingers flying. We have logs, schematics, incomplete, but real. Look, Project Guardian's hand, deterrence protocol, last ditch, buried in the deep architecture. Jay leaned over. On the screen were strings of old military code, diagrams of something that looked like a network of satellites, but on a scale he couldn't comprehend. What is it? He whispered. I don't know all of it, Hana admitted, but it was keyed to an existential threat. It was the final argument, Grandpa. The thing you build and pray you never, ever have to use. The fairy tale had a monster in it. We were the monster, and we built a cage for ourselves, just in case we ever became that again. Jay looked from the ominous, fragmented data on the screen to the peacefully rotating nebula on the wall. He thought of Admiral Tivek's dismissive eyes. The Concordance lived in a gentle, bright galaxy. Or so they believed, and they had just brought a ghost story to life, without realizing that some ghosts are real, and some fairy tales end with a very real, very sharp edge. The cold knot in his stomach tightened. They were safe, for now, but he had a terrible feeling they had just whispered a waking word into a silent, sleeping universe. The apartments on Harmony's Reach were too quiet. On the Guangzhou, there was always sound the hum of failing life support, the creak of old metal, the murmur of people in close quarters. Here, the silence felt heavy and expensive. Jay spent his days in the station's vast arboretum, a forest of alien plants that smelled sweet and strange. He preferred it to the cultural wing, where artists were already making hollahs about the lost children of Terra. Hana hated the arboretum. It felt like another exhibit. She spent her time in the lower decks, in the maintenance warrens where the station's real work happened. It was there she met Min. Min was a mechanic. He was Korean like them, but his family had been on a different sleeper ship, one found by the Concordance a century earlier. They had been assimilated, made peaceful and grateful citizens. Min had his mother's calm face, but his father's restless hands. He worked on the giant atmospheric scrubbers. His clothes stained with grease no sonic cleaner could fully remove. They think your ship is a miracle, Min said to Hana one day, not looking up from the power conduit he was welding. Sparks flew around his gloved hands. A piece of history that sailed through time. It was a falling coffin, Hana replied flatly, handing him a tool. Min glanced at her. He had heard the official story, the gentle tale of a lost garden world. But he saw the way Hana's eyes scanned every room for exits, the way she could estimate structural stress just by looking at a support beam. This was not someone raised on fairy tales. Your grandfather, Min said. He speaks to the council again next week. They want more stories. The warrior cultures of pre-isolation Terra. It's a popular topic. Hana felt a flash of anger. They were turning their survival into a spectacle. They don't want the truth. They want a show. Maybe they can't handle the truth, Min said, his voice low. He finished the weld and powered down his torch. The sudden quiet in the maintenance bay was deep. My grandparents, when they were found, they tried to talk about the wars, the reasons they left. The Concordance counselors called it trauma-induced narrative fabrication. They helped them forget. He tapped the side of his head. Peace is good, but a peace built on forgetting what war really is. That's fragile. Hana looked at him differently then. He wasn't just a station worker. He was a warning. That evening, in their quiet apartment, Jay was reviewing a request from Cullen. The historian, kind as ever, wanted Jay to narrate a children's program about Earth's ancient festivals. Grandfather, Hana said, sitting across from him. The data core from the Guangzhou. The deep files. Project Guardian's hand. We need to look at it properly. Jay sighed. Hana, what for? To scare ourselves? It is dead technology. A plan from a dead time. Is it? She pressed. Why was it in the Guangzhou's core if it was just an old plan? It was in the navigation database, hidden, like a set of coordinates. Reluctantly, Jay agreed. Using the station's public terminals was too risky. But Min had access to isolated repair bays with standalone systems. That night, the three of them, Jay, Hana, and Min, crowded into a small, tool-cluttered office. The air smelled of ozone and metal. Hana jacked her old data core into a reader Min had rigged to not talk to the station network. The files were corrupt, full of gaps. But slowly, a picture emerged. It wasn't a weapon. It was a system. A network of autonomous platforms placed at the edge of the solar system. Its purpose was simple: identification and neutralization of an existential threat. It was the ultimate last resort, triggered only if something powerful enough to bypass all of Earth's other defenses showed up. It's a watchman, Min whispered, tracing a line of broken code on the screen. A watchman told to sleep forever, but to wake up if a monster knocks. But what does it do? Jay asked, a chill in his voice. Hana pulled up a fragmented list. The words were dry, technical. Dimensional anchoring, gravitic shear, targeted biological nullification. It was a list of ways to end things, completely and finally. It doesn't just destroy armies, Hana said, her face pale in the screen's light. It destroys the idea of an army. It unmakes the threat at every level. This is what Grandpa meant. We didn't just make bigger bombs. We made a cure for war itself, and the cure was worse than the disease. That's why we hid it. That's why we left. Just then, the station's public address system chimed. A smooth, automated voice filled the room. Notice, an unscheduled Concordance scout vessel, the Whispering Leaf, has failed to report from its patrol sector near the K23 Nebula. Search and rescue operations are underway. No cause for alarm. Min called up a public star chart. The K23 Nebula was a faint, dusty region, of no strategic value. But in the corner of the chart, a small annotation caught Hana's eye. It was an old Concordance designation for a region of space that was, historically, quiet. The annotation read, "Proximate to former Terra exclusion zone." Her blood went cold. She cross-referenced the scout's last known coordinates with the fragmented, navigational markers in the Guardian's hand file. The markers were not for travel. They were trigger lines, boundaries. "It's here," she said, pointing. The scout vessel's last position overlapped, almost perfectly with one of the ghostly boundaries from the ancient human file. "What's here?" Jay asked. "The doorstep," Hana replied. They flew past the Beware of Dogs sign. The next day, Jay requested an urgent meeting with Admiral Tvek. He was granted 5 minutes in the Admiral's busy schedule. "Admiral, the missing scout," Jay began, standing before the sleek, watery desk. "The location is dangerous. My people, we left safeguards. Passive systems. That area should be avoided." Tvek steepled his webbed fingers. He looked amused. "Safeguards? Navigator J, that region has been quiet for millennia. Our scans show nothing but dust and radiation. Your fairy tales are affecting your judgment. The Whispering Leaf likely suffered a drive malfunction." "It happens." "It is not a malfunction," Jay insisted, his voice tense. "Please recall any other ships from that area. Send no more. It is a trigger zone." Tvek's amusement vanished replaced by cool impatience. A trigger zone? For what? The magical sleeping army of Earth? You have no technology. You have no power. You have stories. The concordance has reality. Do not confuse the two. He stood up, dismissing Jay. Your concern is noted. But we will handle our own affairs. You should focus on your cultural presentations. Jay left, feeling a profound helplessness. They were not just ignored. They were pitied. Meanwhile, Hannah and Min were not sitting still. Using Min's knowledge of the station's sensor grid, they piggybacked a passive scan toward the K23 nebula. They weren't looking for the missing scout. They were looking for what the concordance's smooth. Standard scans might miss residual energy signatures, spatial distortions, and they found something. Or rather, a lack of something. In a patch of space along the trigger line, there was a perfect spherical silence. No background radiation. No stellar dust. It was as if a hole had been punched in reality itself, a hole that was now slowly healing. Something activated there, Min said, his face grim. Something that drank all the energy, all the noise, and then shut off. It scanned them, Hannah realized. The scout ship. It scanned them, and then it went back to sleep, because they weren't a big enough threat. A new, more terrifying thought occurred to her. If a single scout ship could wake the system enough for a look, what would a larger armed force do? What would it take to make the watchmen not just look, but act? She looked at the star chart, at the peaceful, confident worlds of the concordance. They were so bright, so loud, so sure of their place in a gentle universe. And she understood, with a certainty that froze her heart, that the galaxy was about to learn the difference between a fairy tale and a warning. The warning had just blinked its eye, and someone, somewhere, was bound to be stupid enough to shout in its face. The fear began as a whisper in the markets of Harmony's reach. A trade convoy was late. Then a deep space listening post went silent. The Concordance News Network called it minor communications disruptions. But Min, down in the maintenance decks, heard the real talk from the freighter crews. They spoke in hushed tones about strange shadows on the edge of scanner ranges, about space that seemed to ripple. Admiral Tvek made an address. His image, calm and silver gray, appeared on every screen. A minor invasive species, the Ravar, has been encountered beyond the fringe. They are scavengers. The Concordance Defense Fleet is mobilizing to discourage them. There is no cause for alarm. Hannah watched the address in Min's cluttered workshop. He's lying, she said. He's using the tone my parents used when the Guangzhou's primary oxygen processor was failing. A minor issue. It was never minor. Jay, looking older than ever, nodded. They have never seen a real predator. They think because they are civilized, the universe must be too. The truth arrived 7 hours later. It came not as an official report, but as a screaming data burst from a dying Concordance cruiser, the Starlight Breeze. The transmission was fragmented, chaotic. It showed sleek obsidian ships, shaped like jagged teeth, moving with terrifying silence. They did not fire energy weapons. They launched pods that attached to the cruiser's hull and began dissolving it, molecule by molecule, feeding on the metal and the people inside. The final image was of a Ravar boarding pod cracking open the bridge, and a glimpse of the creatures within chitinous, multi-limbed and utterly silent. Panic, cold and sharp, shot through Harmony's reach. The alarms that finally sounded were not for drills. The station's viewports now showed the organized chaos of the Concordance fleet mobilizing. Elegant, graceful ships, gleaming in the station lights, formed up into neat formations. They looked like a parade. Hannah thought they looked like targets that she found Kalan in the historical archives. The scholar's skin was a muted, fearful gray. He was frantically pulling data crystals, his long fingers trembling. Kalan, you have to get us to the council, Hana demanded. There is no time. Kalen's voice wavered. The Ravar. They are not scavengers. They are harvesters. They consume biospheres, technology, everything. They follow legends of rich, undefended worlds. The legend of Earth. Your ship's trail. It has led them here. To us, that was the final, terrible piece of the puzzle. The Ravar hadn't just stumbled upon the Concordance. They had followed the scent. The Guangzhou's desperate flight had been a beacon, not just for rescuers, but for hunters. And the Concordance, with its peaceful talking fleet, was the easy prey caught in between. Hana ran to find her grandfather and Min. She laid it out in the frantic, jostling crowd of a main concourse. They're here for the Earth legend. The Concordance can't stop them. We have to activate Guardian's hand. Jay stared at her. Activate it? Hana, it is a monster of our own making. We do not control it. We don't have to control it, she argued, her voice rising above the panic. We just have to point it at the bigger monster. The file said it was triggered by an existential threat. What is more existential than that? She pointed a shaking finger at a viewport, where the first flashes of weapon fire began to light up the dark. A Concordance Fryver blossomed into a silent, glowing cloud of debris. Min grabbed her arm. Okay, how? The signal source. The activation code. It was in the Guangzhou's core, but the Guangzhou is a derelict, towed to the salvage yards. The beacon, Jay said suddenly, his eyes clearing from their fog of despair. The old navigation beacon. It is the only piece of the ship that still has independent power. It is still pinging its identification. It is a piece of home. It was a slim, desperate chance. The beacon was on the Guangzhou, which was now in a high-security salvage dock. The station was on lockdown. The Ravar Vanguard would be in weapons range in minutes. Min's face set into hard lines. I know the service tunnels. The ones that run to the salvage docks. For emergency repairs. I can get us there. It will be guarded, Jay said. Everyone who can hold a weapon is heading to the defense points, Min replied. The guards will be thin. It was a mad plan. But the alternative was to stand and watch as the bright, talking galaxy was eaten alive. They ran. The service tunnels were tight, hot, and dark, smelling of ozone and stale air. They moved by the dim light of Min's wrist torch. The distant thunder of explosions transmitted through the station's frame, vibrated in their teeth. They reached a maintenance airlock that opened onto the salvage dock. Through a small viewport, they saw the Guangzhou. It looked even more pathetic next to the clean, broken lines of the alien warships. A sad, pitted bullet surrounded by giants. A single Concordance guard in a light security suit stood at the base of the access ramp. His attention fixed on a datapad showing the battle outside. Min didn't hesitate. He opened the airlock and walked out, holding up his mechanic's credentials. Pressure leak in the coupling. He shouted, his voice echoing in the vast dock. Need to seal it before it blows the dock sensors. The guard, distracted and nervous, waved him through. Hurry up! They boarded the Guangzhou for the last time. The interior was cold, dark, and smelled of death and recycled air. Their footsteps echoed in the hollow metal passages. Hana led the way to the primary navigation spire, a small room at the ship's heart where Jay had spent his life. The beacon console was a simple, rugged block of plastic and metal. A single, small green light blinked. Ping, ping. A lonely sound calling to a home that might not exist. Hana plugged her data core into the auxiliary port. Her fingers flew, navigating the archaic interface. She found the deep, hidden file. The activation protocol. It wasn't a button that said, fire. It was a complex sequence. A song of codes and verifications meant to prove the signal came from a human vessel in extremis. It needs a voice print, she said, her voice tight. A command-level authorization. From the captain. Jay's face went slack. The last captain had died years ago, her body committed to the void. Outside, a massive impact shook the entire station. The lights on the Guangzhou flickered. A terrible screeching sound echoed through the dock, a sound of metal being torn apart. The Ravar were boarding Harmony's Reach. It needs a captain's voice, Hannah repeated, tears of frustration in her eyes. Jay stepped forward. He placed a gentle hand on the cold console. He closed his eyes. When he spoke, his voice was not the tired, soft voice of a refugee. It was the clear, commanding tone of a navigator of the last exodus. A man who had held the course for a dying people. This is Navigator Kim Jae. Of the generation ship Guangzhou, acting under marital law protocol Omega. Vessel is lost. Civilization is under existential threat. We are the last argument. Do you hear me? He looked at Hannah. She entered the final sequence. The green light on the console stopped its steady blink. It began to pulse rapidly. A low, powerful hum vibrated up from the console, through the deck, into their bones. On the screen, a single line of text appeared in stark. Ancient font. Priority signal accepted. Guardian's hand awaiting coordinates. Hannah input the Ravar fleet's position, pulled from the station's besieged network in their final moments before the tunnel. She added the location of Harmony's Reach. A final prompt flashed. Confirm. Activation. Protocol is irrevocable. Jay, Hannah, and Min looked at each other. In their eyes was the weight of it. They were not soldiers. They were survivors, a mechanic, an engineer. They were about to unleash a storybook monster upon a very real war. Hannah pressed her palm flat on the screen. Confirm. The beacon did not make a loud noise. The green light simply turned a deep, solid red. The hum ceased. The signal was gone. For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. The only sound was the distant, growing scream of the Ravar advance. They had sent a whisper into the dark. A whisper that said, "The children are in danger." Now they could only wait to see if the sleeping guardian had heard them, or if the fairy tale truly was just a story. The console screen went dark, its final duty done. In the silence of the dead ship, the only thing left was the sound of their own breathing, and the approaching end of everything they knew. The silence after the beacon's signal was the worst part. Standing in the cold, dead heart of the Guangzhou, Jay, Hannah, and Min could only listen to the sounds of the station dying. The distant thunder of explosions was getting closer. A new, terrible sound joined the chaos, a high-pitched, grinding screech. It was the sound of the Ravar harvesters cutting through the outer hull of Harmony's Reach, eating their way in. It didn't work, Min said, his voice hollow. He was looking at the dark console as if it had betrayed them. Hannah couldn't speak. Her mind was a numb void. They had gambled everything on a ghost, on a line of broken code from a lost time. She felt a crushing weight of guilt. They had given everyone here false hope in their final moments. We tried, Jay said. He put a hand on her shoulder. It was cold. That is all our people have ever done. We tried. A massive tremor shook the dock. Through the Guangzhou's viewport, they saw a section of the station's outer spar buckle and tear away, splintering into the blackness. Swarms of jagged, black Ravar skiffs poured through the hole like insects into a nest. Then, the lights on the Guangzhou's console flickered. Not the green power light. Not the red activation light. A new, soft amber glow from a secondary panel Hannah had never noticed before. A single word appeared on the dusty screen, in the same ancient, blocky font. Acknowledged. A deep, subsonic vibration began. It wasn't coming from the station. It wasn't coming from the ship. It was coming from space itself, a frequency that made their teeth ache and their bones hum. On the main viewport, the stars wavered. It was as if the black fabric of space was a pond, and someone had dropped a stone in a place far, far away. Near the breach where the Ravar were invading, space twisted. It wasn't a flashy light show. It was a silent, profound distortion. Reality seemed to fold, then tear. And through that tear, it arrived. It was not a ship. It was a smooth, gray-black surface, curved and endless. More of it pushed through, impossibly huge, silent, and serene. It was a sentinel node, one of the guardians. It was the size of a small moon, its surface marked with geometric patterns that hurt the eyes to look at for too long. It made the Ravar harvesters, which had seemed so terrifying moments before, look like gnats. For a moment, everything stopped. The Ravar attack froze. The Concordance's frantic defensive fire sputtered out. The entire battle held its breath. Then, a pulse of pure white light emanated from the node. It was not an explosion. It washed over the Ravar skiffs at the breach. Where it touched them, they didn't blow up. They simply came apart. Their components metal, organic matter. Energy separated gently and drifted away like ash. Neutralized and harmless. A message broadcast on every frequency. In every language, including an archaic dialect of Korean. The voice was calm, genderless, and utterly without emotion. Identify. Ravar swarm. Classification. Existential consumptive threat. Earth protocol engaged. Neutralization authorized. The node moved. It didn't travel. Space bent around it. It appeared in the middle of the main Ravar Armada, a swarm of hundreds of jagged motherships. The Concordance fleet, what was left of it, watched in stunned, silent horror. What happened next was not a battle. It was a process. Gravitic shear. The space around a group of Ravar ships wrinkled. The ships were not crushed, but pulled into spaghetti-thin strings of matter and then smoothed out into nothing. Dimensional. Anchoring. Another node appeared. Ravar ships trying to flee into faster-than-light travel found space around them as solid as stone. They slammed into a wall of unmoving reality and shattered. Targeted. Biological nullification. A shimmering wave swept from a third node. It passed through Concordance ships, leaving the crews unharmed but dizzy. It washed over the Ravar vessels. Inside, the chitinous creatures simply ceased functioning, their biological processes unwinding at the molecular level, leaving empty husks. There was no rage, no fury, no heroic dogfights or last stands. It was a cold, clean, surgical removal of a problem. The Ravar, for all their terrifying hunger, were primitive in the face of this. They tried to fight. Their weapons flared against the node's surface and did nothing. They tried to run and found space itself refusing their escape. They were not defeated. They were deleted. On the bridge of his crippled flagship, Admiral Tvek watched the main viewer, his large black eyes wide with an emotion he had never known. Pure, primal awe. He saw his mighty fleet reduced to wreckage by the Ravar in minutes. And he saw the Ravar Armada, the scourge of the galaxy, being dismantled with less effort than a child taking apart a model. He thought of Jay's warnings. He thought of the words fairy tale, and felt a shame so deep it was physical. Inside the Guangzhou, Hannah, Jay, and Min were also watching. They saw the terrifying, beautiful efficiency of the Guardian's hand. They saw the weapon their ancestors had built in their darkest hour, the monster they had locked away. My God, Min whispered. We really were the monsters. Jay shook his head slowly, his eyes reflecting the silent flashes of unraveling ships. No, we were the ones who were so afraid of becoming monsters that we built a cage for the idea itself. That, he pointed at the node, now calmly erasing the last Rayvar command ship. That is not a warrior. That is a surgeon. And the disease is war. Within an hour, it was over. The Rayvar Armada was gone. Not destroyed in a fiery nebula of debris, but disassembled. The sentinel nodes hung in the silence, 3 moon-sized sentinels in a now calm space. The Concordance fleet was a field of floating, gently spinning wrecks. Harmony's reach bled atmosphere from its breach, but the station was intact. The Rayvar boarding parties inside were just empty shells. The primary node moved, positioning itself between the station and the direction of Earth. A new, tight beam transmission arrived for the Guangzhou alone. Threat neutralized. Signal origin authenticated. Awaiting further instructions from Terran authority. The 3 humans looked at each other. They had summoned the god. Now what? The comm system of the Guangzhou crackled to life. It was Admiral Tvek's voice. He sounded different. All the arrogance was gone, burned away. What was left was raw, shaky respect and a deep, unspoken fear. Navigator J, this is Admiral Tvek. Please respond. Jay reached for the comm. He was just an old man from a lost ship. But in that moment, he was the closest thing to a Terran authority in this part of the galaxy. He was the one the gods were listening to. This is Jay, he said, his voice tired but clear. There was a long pause. They could almost hear the Admiral struggling to find words that mattered anymore. What? Tvek finally asked, his voice barely a whisper over the comm. Are your instructions? The silence in the Guangzhou's navigation spire was heavy. Jay held the comm unit, the Admiral's question hanging in the air like smoke. What are your instructions? He looked at Hana and Min. They were just survivors, a mechanic and an engineer. They had no instructions for gods and giants. Stand by, Jay said into the comm, his voice much calmer than he felt. He put the unit down. Outside the viewport, the 3 sentinel nodes hung in perfect, motionless formation. They were not aimed at the Concordance wrecks, but their silent presence was a pressure on the mind. The fairy tale had arrived, and it was infinitely more terrifying than any story. They're waiting for us, Hannah said. She was staring at the main node. They answered our call. They think we're in charge. We trigger it, Min replied, rubbing his face. That doesn't mean we control it. That thing? It follows logic, not orders. What if its logic decides the Concordance is a future threat? The thought was ice in Jay's veins. He had seen what neutralization looked like. He keyed the comm again, this time opening a channel to the node itself, using the frequency from its last message. This is Kim Jay of the Guangzhou. We thank you for your intervention. The immediate threat is over. Please maintain position. Do not engage the other vessels. They are not a threat. He hoped he was right. A response came instantly, the same calm, empty voice. Confirmed. Non-engagement protocol, active for designated non-hostiles. Awaiting retrieval. Retrieval. The word sent a new kind of chill through him. They were going to be taken? Home? Or to some cold archive for study? A new ship arrived. It did not tear through space. It slipped out of a gentle warp bubble with a soft blue glow. It was smaller than the nodes, but still larger than any Concordance cruiser. It was sleek, shaped like a slim arrowhead, and its hull was a matte gray that seemed to drink the light. It bore a single simple symbol on its flank, a blue circle embracing a white star. An old flag dot, it moved gracefully towards Harmony's reach and docked with the station's main umbilical, as if it had the codes. No one tried to stop it. No one could dot an hour later. Jay, Hana, and Min were summoned to the station's main docking lounge. The area was usually bustling with species from a dozen worlds. Now it was empty, cleared by a squad of very serious Concordance guards who looked more frightened than authoritative Dot standing in the center of the lounge was. Commander Lee. She was a Korean woman in her 50s. Her black hair streaked with silver and tied back sharply. She wore a form-fitting uniform of the same matte gray as her ship, simple and functional. She was not tall, but she stood with a stillness that commanded the vast room. Her eyes were dark and intelligent, taking in every detail: the scared guards, the damaged station, the 3 humans who stood before her. Behind her stood 2 figures in light armor, their faces hidden behind smooth helmets. They were utterly still. Jay felt a lifetime of longing and fear well up inside him. This was a face from home, a real living person from Earth, but she looked at them not with tears of reunion, but with the careful assessment of a soldier. "Navigator Jay," Commander Lee said. Her voice was clear, without a translator. It was pure, unaccented Korean of a kind they hadn't heard in generations. "I am Commander Lee Soo-jin of the Terran Defense Accord vessel Steadfast. We received the Guardian's ping." Hannah found her voice first. You got our signal?" "The Guardian's hand does not send signals," Commander Lee corrected gently. "It sends a conclusion." The conclusion was that a Terran distress protocol had been legitimately activated in a sector containing a consumptive zenithreat. "We came to audit the conclusion and to retrieve our people." Her gaze swept over them. "You are all that's left of the Gwangju?" "There are more on the medical barge," Jay said. "Survivors." She gave a single brief nod. "They will be cared for." Admiral Tevek entered the lounge, flanked by Kalen. The Admiral's usual arrogance was gone. He looked shrunken. He stopped a respectful distance from Commander Lee, his posture that of a junior officer reporting to a superior. "Commander," Tevek began, "on behalf of the Galactic Concordance, we offer our profound gratitude for your intervention." Lee turned her head slowly to look at him. "Your gratitude is noted, Admiral Tevek, but it is misplaced. We did not intervene to save you." She looked back at Jay. "We intervened because a human lifeboat protocol was triggered. The Guardian's sole purpose is to ensure that no existential threat reaches human space or touches human lives ever again. You were incidental." The bluntness of it was like a physical blow to Tevek. His people, his civilization, had been incidental scenery in a Terran security operation. Then, "What happens now?" Kalen asked, his skin a pale, anxious yellow. "Now," Commander Lee said, "we re-establish contact." The isolation was a choice. A long, quiet choice to grow up in the dark. "We have watched you from a distance. We saw you build a peaceful coalition. A noble effort." Her eyes hardened just a fraction. "But you built it on the belief that the universe is gentle. It is not. The Rayvar are not unique. You are simply lucky you are not found by something worse sooner." She walked towards the great viewport, looking out at her silent, moon-sized sentinels and the battered Concordance fleet. "You thought Earth was a fairy tale, a story of magic or of primitive fear. It was neither. It was a lesson we learned at the edge of our own extinction. The lesson was this: the only thing that guarantees peace is the absolute, certain knowledge of annihilation. We built that certainty, and then we hid it, because a weapon that powerful should never be a tool. It should only ever be a promise." She turned back to them all. "The promise has been revealed. So we must talk. As equals. Not as rescuers and victims. Not as ancient gods and curious children. You will need to decide, Concordance, if you can live next door to the monster from your stories. And we," she said, looking at Jay, Hana, and Min, "must learn what it means to be human in a galaxy that now knows what we are capable of." Jay stepped forward. "And us, the lost ones?" For the first time, Commander Lee's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. You are coming home, navigator, to a world you have never seen. It is not a paradise. It is a world that remembers. It will be strange to you, but it is yours. She then looked at Min. And for those of our people who have made lives here, the bridge is open. The choice is yours. Min looked at Hana, then at the broken station, then out at the stars. He had a choice now. A real one. Commander Lee walked to the viewport, standing beside Jay. Together, they looked at the two realities. The wounded, beautiful, talking galaxy of the Concordance. And the silent, gray power of Earth's promise. The fairy tale is over, Commander Lee said, not unkindly. Now comes the difficult part. Now we write the history.